Good morning, kids. My name is Max Chang. I'm with the Spike 150 Foundation, and we are here today to talk about what happened last Friday at Promontory Summit, Utah.
Oh, I'm sorry, did it? Yep.
And what we're trying to do, first of all, we have some goals here at the Spike 150 Foundation. The first one is to unify. Just like what the Transcontinental Railroad did 150 years ago. It unified the country in two ways. Geographically, connecting two great oceans, as well as, unifying a country that's coming off a very bitter civil war. We also want to educate. I've been going around to schools, classes like yours, to educate. And what I'm trying to hope for is that you get inspired. That we cannot tell you everything about the Chinese railroad worker or the Transcontinental Railroad in our short period together today. But I hope you get inspired, just like with this or any other subject that you are going to be interested in, that you go out and you learn more. You read more books, you go research on the internet, you go look at art related to that, and that is what we really hope. And finally, we want to leave a legacy. And by leaving a legacy, it means I have a homework assignment for you. I know, you're groaning here, it's the end of the school year. I've even had one kid tell me that they have a no homework policy at their school. But don't worry, this homework's not due until 2069. Okay? So on May 10th, 2019, this past Friday, nearly 20,000 people came to this just desolate spot in the northern desert to celebrate the driving of a golden spike into a polished laurel tie exactly 150 years ago. And I'm going to bring my friend Johnny K to tell us a little bit about
In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Railroad Act to build a transcontinental railway, ocean to ocean, linking east and west, and opening up millions of acres of land for settlement.
So the Pacific Railway Act of 1862 was signed by President Lincoln. A lot of people say, hey, with hindsight, I had 20/20 vision. I know what to do. But Lincoln was great because he had great foresight. He was able to see what we needed to do in 1862 to heal a country. He was a country lawyer, became a railroad lawyer, and eventually the President of the United States. But in 1862, as I mentioned, we're going through a civil war, and that he knew that we needed to tie the country together. So in 1862, we signed the Pacific Railway Act. Now, just for fun, does anyone know where this Pacific Railway Act is today? Summit, Promontory Summit? No, not Promontory Summit. That's a good guess. Where do you think it is today? A lot of people have been guessing Washington, D.C., a museum. Yes?
The capital?
That's correct. That is correct. The capital of the state of Utah. We, Spike 150, has brought in the 1862 Pacific Railway Act because we feel it's so important for children like you and the rest of Utah to see this. And we're actually very lucky. It can only be shown every 6 months out of every 10 years. And we were able to bring it in. California wanted it, we got it. The Lincoln Library in Springfield, Illinois wanted it, we got it. And so we have a chance to go to there to see it along with the Golden Spikes and the mall. So if you go to the Gold Room at the Capitol from here to June 23rd, you will have an opportunity to see this magnificent piece and what I like to call Abe's autograph. So let's look about what happened or what the railroad maps looked like in 1860 before the Transcontinental Railroad. As you can see here, most everything is concentrated in the northeast area, a little bit in the south, and just a tiny little spur here in California. Now, it would take 6 months to go from New York to San Francisco. And you had 3 ways you could go. You go across by land, which is pretty easy. From here, you go by rail, you go by land, horse, buggy. But once you hit the mountains here, many people died. It was very difficult. So there's another way you can go. You go from here, you can sail all the way down past South America, up Chile, come back up, and go, ooh, that's a long trip. No whole questions for now, okay? And the third way is sea, land, sea, probably the most difficult way. You go, you stop in Panama, which did not have a canal at the time. You would cross the Isthmus of Panama, braving malaria, wild animals, dysentery, and you get to the other side to the Pacific, and you hope, you're hitchhiking literally, hoping a ship will stop and take you on board to go back to San Francisco. So the railroad was very important. As we see on our next slide, that once we built this, it reduced it from 6 months or 26 weeks to 1 week. It reduced the cost from $1,000, which is about $20,000 in today's money, to $150 first class and $70 in the economy. And what also, like I mentioned, it connected two great oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific. But more importantly, it opened all this land for development and settlement, as Johnny talked about. And also we could bring goods, natural resources back and forth. And so this, in my opinion, without the railroad, the industrialization of America, and for us to become what we later become a world power, would not have occurred or have been greatly delayed without this railroad. Over the next few decades, like in 1880, we see that we've increased more, and this is where Utah starts becoming the crossroads of the West. Here, Idaho, through the town of Kelton, which you can still visit, it's a small ghost town now, started to develop. Next, we will see that he will over the whole crossroads of the West here, and that the Pacific Northwest really would not have been developed that well without Utah. And today, I believe that we are still, as we actually move on here, that in 2019 we had 250,000 miles. We are still the crossroads of the West, but not just by rail, but also by air. We're building this brand new airport in Salt Lake City that's going to connect us to the world. We're potentially building a new inland port that will also connect us to all these different parts. So Utah economically benefited really one of the most from this railroad. So let's move forward to the next slide. And we're going to talk about rolling to Promontory, Utah. The 1862 Pacific Railway Act gave the authority to create two railroad companies. The Central Pacific Railroad, which built it from Sacramento ultimately to Promontory Summit, and the Union Pacific, which went from Omaha to Promontory Summit. And Johnny's going to talk about, well, not talk about, he's better at singing about rolling to Promontory, Utah.
Rolling on to Promontory, Utah, we are rolling through the prairie grass and a mountain pass, breaking trail for the rail and the iron wheel, tying east to west with a ribbon of steel. At Promontory Summit on May 10th, 1869, the last spike, a golden spike, was driven into a laurel tie. And from Omaha, across the Nebraska plains, over the Rocky Mountains of Wyoming, a distance of 1,086 miles, came locomotive number 119 to gently kiss cowcatchers with locomotive Jupiter out from Sacramento, 690 miles away over the Sierra Nevada range. And around the nation was telegraphed a single word: done!
Done! Now that, my friends, is what I'm going to officially call the first tweet of America. Because when they're building the Transcontinental Railroad, they're also building the telegraph. And when they tapped out the words done in Morse code, all of a sudden cannons went off in the harbors of both New York and San Francisco. And church bells rang across the country. We were truly united as a country, not just geographically, but metaphorically as one nation. And that was a really exciting thing. And as Johnny mentioned, the Central Pacific, starting in January 1863, built 690 miles. And the Pacific, Union Pacific, starting in July of 1865, a year and a half later, built 1,086 miles for a total of 1,776 miles, which I call it the most patriotic railroad in America. Because what happened in 1776? Yes. Not the ending of the Civil War. Civil War was after that. What do we do every July 4th besides eat a lot of hot dogs and shoot off fireworks? What do?
We celebrate the 4th of July and shoot off fireworks.
So what is the 4th of July, though? What exactly is the 4th of July? Yes? We are celebrating the Declaration of Independence, or Independence Day. And for those who were able to be there on May 10th, John Meacham, our historian, says something really important. That the most important words originally ever written in English are the following. Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. And so to me, that this railroad is very symbolic of our great nation. It gave us additional independence to grow as a country. Now, here's something kind of weird to me. It's that when we go through history, I want you to not just regurgitate or repeat what I say or anyone says. I want you to start thinking about things. So I want you, this is trying to train you about how to think about things. Now, this doesn't make sense to me. A railroad company starts a year and a half earlier, yet they actually do almost 400 miles less, 40% less. Now, why do you think they did less miles?
Rough terrain.
I'm sorry?
Rough terrain.
Rough terrain. That is excellent, because while all men are created equal, not all railroad track is created equal. If you look at the Union Pacific side, it's very flat. Lots of plains, so it's easy. You don't have to do a lot of adjustments to grade and so forth. But here, as our young man has pointed out, rough terrain. That is the Sierra Mountain Range. Solid granite. Solid granite, that is the hardest substance in North America. Quick question, we're trying to go quickly, but we'll try to call questions with it. Go ahead.
Well, this is basically another reason why I think that this part of the railroad would probably do a bit slower.
Sure.
Probably because a shortage of resources.
You know, this is excellent. You have a smart class, a shortage of resources. This is true because what you could do, you could bring the rail supplies by train to Omaha, because we already had a rail here, right? But what do you do about building here? What do you have to do?
Well, you have to transport it past where the other rails.
And there's only one way to do that, and that's to put them on a boat and put it around South America and up. Very good. Excellent point. I'm glad I called on you. Next, please. So we have the beautiful 119, the Union Pacific, who's rolling in, and as we will see here, the beautiful Jupiter. And this is the cowcatcher, what Johnny talked about. And they kissed, and they had a wedding ceremony, we called it. And then we have the last spike. This is the Golden Spike. The Pacific Railroad ground broke on January 8, 1863, and completed May 8, 1869. Wait. Is there anything weird about this spike? What is wrong with this spike? Yes. No, gold is good. Gold is always good. Yeah?
It has writing on it.
I'm sorry?
It has writing on it.
No, writing on it is right, but something is really unusual about the writing. Yes.
It's 2 days early.
2 days earlier. What? May 8th? It's not May 10th. Have we been lied to this whole time? That's really May 8th and not May 10th?
No, the spike is the fortune.
The spike is a fortune teller? Let me tell you what happened. This is a bit of trivia. So if you ever go see a golden spike, and they say it's the golden spike, the last spike, and it says May 10th, you're going to know it's a fake. All right, so this is a bit of trivia. So what happened was that when they were complete, they did indeed schedule the ceremony to be on May 8, 1869. So Barry Hughes, who was a newspaperman out of San Francisco, and originally he was asked to invest in the Central Pacific Railroad, but he declined. He wanted to commemorate the ceremony. And so what he did was he commissioned a goldsmith to put together the spike. And so they engraved it hastily because they were running out of time and put it on the date May 8, 1869. It gave it to Leland Stanford, who hopped on his train and headed towards Promontory Summit. On the way, he stopped in Nevada, got the silver spike. In the meantime, on the other side of the rail, on the Union Pacific side, Thomas Doctorand for the Union Pacific was headed over west towards Promontory Summit. But he had done something really kind of not nice to the workers. He let a lot of the workers go without paying them. He owed them $200,000, which is about $4 million in today's money. So through a series of telegraphs, again, our social media at that time, they were able to pinpoint when Thomas Durant train was going to be where. And then what they did is they laid railroad ties just outside of Piedmont, Wyoming, which is now a ghost town just east of Evanston. The train had to stop in its tracks. And literally, just like the old Wild West, guess what? They held up this train and held them hostage until they could get some form of payment. And then, ultimately, when they did get some payment, I don't believe they got the full amount, they let Thomas Durant and the 119 go through, and they had to have the ceremony on May 10th instead of May 8th. So that's a bit of trivia, and here's another second bit of trivia. In 1932, a woman in Berkeley, California found a receipt. It was billed to Barry Hughes from the goldsmith, but it was not for one spike, but for 2 spikes. And all of a sudden it goes, there must be another spike. But nobody knew about this spike until 2005, when the Hughes family finally took the spike out of their private collection and put it on consignment. Where fortunately the California State Museum pulled it. Now how are you going to tell the difference between the last spike and this what we call the lost spike? The lost spike is more intricately carved. You can tell that they've taken their time, and they probably did it after the ceremony. Well, we know they did it after the ceremony because the date on that is May 10th. So that is our spike trivia of the day.
That's interesting.
And here's the mall. This is the actual mall that Leland Stanford used to swing and hammer in the spike. Johnny, could you please show us what happened?
Now, this is Leland Stanford. He's president of the Central Pacific from California. He was governor of California for 2 years, and he didn't get too much hammer swinging training.
Stanford swings and misses. Yeah. And actually, after that, Thomas Durant missed, everyone missed, and a regular worker, who we don't know exactly if it was a Chinese or Irish or so forth, but a regular worker finally drove it in. And this brings us to this famous picture. I believe that when you went to the Utah Museum of Fine Arts, you were able to see this picture. If you have seen this picture, please raise your hand. Yes. Basically everyone in this room. It's Andrew Russell's East and West shaking hands at the laying of the last rail, or the champagne shot. Okay. Commonly known as the champagne shot. And this picture is really iconic, important, but there's an old saying that a picture tells you 1,000 words. But my philosophy is that a picture may tell you 1,000 words, but it doesn't always tell you the whole story. And as a result, what we're doing here at the Spike 150 Foundation is making sure we expand the lens of history. And by expanding the lens of history, we see more of this picture. And we want to see things from different perspectives and from different people's perspectives. So let's move on to this next picture. Now, how many of you have seen this picture? A handful, just a handful, even though it was actually in the museum. But the main focus was, of course, with that champagne shot. But look here, so we see a different view of the Jupiter. We can't really see we only see the smokestack really of the engine of the 119. And this is headed east towards Corinne, Utah, and the Wasatch Mountains. Now let's see this next picture. How many have seen this picture? Well, actually, a little few more than the previous picture, but just a handful. Now this picture is done by the same photographer on the same day, but gives us a completely different story. This is called The Chinese Laying the Last Rail on May 10, 1869 by Andrew Russell. And so what has happened was, before the ceremony, before the driving with the Golden Spike, the Union Pacific first had 8 Irish rail workers come in and carry in the rail as a ceremonious last rail. So they know that this is the last rail. And the Central Pacific had 8 Chinese railroad workers come in and lay a ceremonious last rail. And actually you can see a slice of that last rail at the Capitol along with the spike and the mall and the 1862 Pacific Railway Act. We brought all those in so you can see these great pieces of history. And that's what happened. Now, what I contend is that May 10th, 1869 is an important day because that was the day we completed it. But it's a blip in the timeline of the Transcontinental Railroad. Things happened before and things happened after. So let's use our critical thinking skills, and this is really thinking out loud. So we have 8 Chinese railroad workers. Well, where did they come from? I mean, exactly from where in China? Why did they leave China? You know, and then what did they do when they got here? And then after this moment, did they stay? Did they go home? What did they do? What happened to them? And there's a great story for before and after. So we're going to fast forward 50 years. In 50 years, I'm looking at a newspaper here from May 11th, 1919. This is the day after the golden anniversary, or the 50th anniversary of the driving of Golden Spike. And I think by looking at newspapers and understanding the context of what is going on in our world is also very useful. So here we're talking about President Wilson may tour the United States in support of the League of Nations Pact. Now, you probably have not heard of the League of Nations yet, but that is eventually what we turned into the United Nations. And this is dated May 11th, as I mentioned, which is exactly 6 months before Veterans Day. And Veterans Day actually was Armistice Day, when that's the end of World War I. So it's kind of neat that all these things are tied together. And here, there's a headline here saying the driving of the Gold Spike is celebrated at Ogden. Not a promontory summit, but Ogden. Next. And so the Salt Lake Tribune put together this great camera story of the Golden Spike celebration at Ogden. And if we look at the first picture here, highlighted here is actually a replica of the Jupiter. The original Jupiter was actually dismantled by the end of the century because they're using it for parts. They actually didn't think it was important to keep this for historical purposes. And that, again, with hindsight, they probably would have said, oh, we should have kept it. But they needed those parts, so we have a replica. The next picture we want to highlight is this woman here who was actually the first white woman born in Ogden, Utah. So Ogden wanted to celebrate both the future and the past, so they celebrate the past. And they had this young baby, I think being held, what I presume, a Native American woman. And that baby were alive today, it would have just celebrated its 100th birthday. And our next picture I'd like to highlight is here in the bottom right corner, where this gentleman is from the Washakie Nation, probably a chief, which is north of Promontory Summit. And he rode his horse down with full headdress to be part of this very inclusive parade. But the picture that is interesting to me the most, that's related to our subject today, is the next picture. And here we go. Now, who do you think these 3 people are? Yes. Chinese immigrants. They are Chinese railroad workers. And you know what's even more interesting than that? Do you remember those 8 people that laid that last rail in 1869 on May 10th? 3 of these are 3 of the 8. They were still alive 50 years later. They were still in Utah. So we know, next slide. We know that, for example, we know their names. Jing Chu, Wang Fuk, and Li Shao. These are 3 workers. They stayed in Utah. They probably worked on the railroad their entire lives. And they were celebrated. And the Tribune wrote, today they had their day of glory. And then there they are on a modern day float of 1919. I know you guys think, wow, that's really old fashioned. But the motor car, this is now we're transitioning to the motor car, or the horseless carriage. And this float was celebrated. You had all the paint, you can see the stars and stripes on the float, 1869, and they're actually on a hand cart. And the hand cart is something where they would push and they would go along the rail to maintain the rail, to fix things. If there are loose spikes or broken railroad ties, or something that's come loose, they would use that to go up and down the rail to fix it. And I love this particular quote as I read it. All 3 were hale and hearty and seemed pleased as boys with a holiday, one of the first of their long lives. Being so honored was a bit strange to them, as the aged men were shy with embarrassment when the crowds they passed burst forth in cheers. Now she sends chills down my spine, thinking about these Ogdenites, as these guys are going down Wall Avenue, presumably in front of Ogden Union Station, and they're cheering them on for what? For not only building the Transcontinental Railroad, but also building Utah and building America. So let's rewind now. We fast forwarded, but let's rewind past, before May 10th, 1869, and let's think about where did the Chinese come from? Now, they came from China, that's pretty clear, but why did they come from? Now, being in the Sierra Mountains is solid granite, as we mentioned, and people would go work, and they would chip, and they would get like an inch a day through that mountain. At best, inch or two. And it was hard work, so a lot of them, they lost workers who wanted to rather go find gold. And so Charles Crocker, who was the head of the Central Pacific, went to James Strobridge, the chief engineer, so to speak, or the chief operator guy. And he said, why don't we try some Chinese workers? And Strobridge was totally against it. Those Chinese guys, they're too small. They're only like 5 foot tall, maybe 110 pounds. Like, we're much bigger now. I'm probably like 2 Chinese rail workers now. And they're not going to be able, they don't even speak our language, they can't do this. And then Charles Crocker says, they did build the Great Wall of China. So they tried out 50, and they worked out remarkably well. They worked as a team, they were strong, they were efficient. And so they went and tried to grab as many Chinese workers in California as they could, but there weren't enough. So they sent recruiters to China, to the Pearl River Basin area, where Hong Kong is, and to the Guangdong province. And they went primarily for 4 counties, Taishan, Taiping, Xinhu, and Anping counties. Counties are like Salt Lake County, Weber County, Davis County, and our province is like states like Utah, California, and so forth. So we have to understand, well, why would they come here? Why would they leave home to a place that has snow, and they don't have snow, they don't speak the language? Why would they leave? So we should understand what was happening in their country. We had a civil war going on in the United States, and our population was about 30 million people at a time. I want you to remember that number, 30 million people. And then, for example, Utah today has about 3.1 million people. So almost 10 times the population of Utah today. So in China, there was a thing called the Taiping Rebellion, their civil war against the Qing dynasty. In that rebellion, 30 million people were killed. So that's the entire population of the United States killed at this. As a result, there was a lot of poverty. There was a lot of famine, starvation. People needed to save their families. They didn't want to leave, but they had to leave. And that's what I call push factors. Okay? And that has happened not just in China, but in many instances across the world. In fact, across the world at the same time, there's something called the potato famine happening in Ireland. And a lot of workers got pushed out of Ireland, metaphorically that is. They had a need to go somewhere to find a better life. And it's kind of interesting that they eventually met in Utah from different parts of the world. So then there's what I call pull factors. Okay, why did they choose America versus Japan, Australia, Europe? Any guesses? Yes.
Equal rights.
I'm sorry?
Is it equal rights?
Equal rights. We're a free country. Equal rights is great. May not help them feed them as much, but no. Any other suggestions? Guesses? Okay. Anyone here knows what happened in 1849? I'm going to give you help. Anyone here? Yes?
Gold.
Gold! Eureka! There's gold in them hills. And in fact, the Chinese called San Francisco Gamsan, or Gold Mountain. That they knew that there's gold in those mountains. And they imagined, they praised like us thinking of winning a big jackpot or something, or a lottery or something like that. And then they say, wow, I could go to Gamsan, and I can fill my pockets with gold, line my jacket with gold, fill my bags with gold, and I go home and I can live as an emperor. And that is what draws. And if we go back, like for example, my parents came to America in 1964 from Taiwan. And many of you, like for example, raise your hand if your parents were not born in America. Okay. Raise your hand if you were not born in America. Just a couple. Okay. But I can probably surmise that if we go back to what I call the origins of your family histories, most of us, not necessarily all of us, but most of us can go back to pinpoint a single reason. They came to America for a better life. And for the hope of a better life. Which really, America, again, kind of paraphrasing John Meacham, has a great partnership between public and private sectors, of freedom and so forth, and opportunity. And that's why they came here for a better life. So that's what we call pull factors. So let's kind of look about what things or what habits the Chinese brought with them when they came to America. First of all, they like to drink tea. And that actually kept them very healthy. Why would tea keep them healthy? Because they drank tea, they boiled water. And that helped reduce, not completely eliminate, the bacteria and other things that can make you sick. If you think about it, you go back to what I said, dysentery, like we talked about when we go to Panama, that has probably killed tens of millions in the history of this planet. I don't know the exact numbers, but millions and millions for sure. Just from a simple thing because of bad water. And so that's one thing they did. They also, their meals were very adaptable. They ate a lot of fresh vegetables that they shipped from farms that they started to grow in California. They even had, their protein was more limited. They had a lot of fish. I just learned this past week that they even brought in catfish from the West Coast to ponds or lakes in the Sierras and used that for cooking. They had a lot of pickled goods or dry goods. And so those things, by keeping a balanced meal, kept them healthier. So if you, for example, are a railroad owner, okay, and you have a choice of hiring someone who is sick all the time or healthy all the time, you're going to choose
Healthy.
Yes, I know, I'm Captain Obvious once in a while, but that's really makes a lot of sense. They also had Chinese herbal medicine. I purposely brought up this particular person because he's quite famous. And we have quite famous descendants from him. And Yi Fengcheng is a herbal medicine doctor. And Governor Leland Stanford, when he was governor of California, his wife Jane Stanford came down with a lung ailment. And she was very ill, and none of the Western medicines would work. So they went to his store, the Chu Key store, and said, hey, could you please help Mrs. Stanford? So he concocted something, I don't know exactly what it was, gave it to her, and over time she recovered. And the story goes, as I read, like this. Neither Governor Stanford nor Jane Stanford or any of the staff members cared to learn his name. Then whenever they referred to him, they just called him Chu Ki. Now let's put it in context today. Let's say you have a very bad cough, and you go to the pharmacy like Walgreens, and the pharmacist says, okay, here's the cough medicine that'll heal you. Instead of thinking, thank you, Dr. Smith, the pharmacist, you called him or her, thanks, Walgreens. Now,
Makes no sense.
it doesn't make sense, right? And I had a mentor once in my life who told me a very wise phrase, which I want to share with you. He said, Max, there are two things in your life that no one should ever take from you. One is your life, and two is your name. Your name is you, and only yours. So that's why we try to avoid making fun of someone's name. Or that's what at least I do. Let's, for example, what's your name? Leo, what's yours?
Selena.
And yours? 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 Okay. Now, for example, let's say that you were Chinese railroad workers, you came here. And instead of calling you Leo and so forth and so on, we just all called you John Chinaman. Or let's say we reverse it. We all go to China. And instead of calling Max or so forth, we're all known as John American or Jane American. How does that make you feel? Uncomfortable. What else? Upset.
Maybe sad or
Sad. Because your name is lost. And this theme of not knowing or not caring to learn somebody's name is a common theme that we'll see throughout this particular lesson. Next. The Chinese also face what we call pay inequity. Now, this side of the room, you guys are Irish workers. This side of the room, you're Chinese railroad workers. Each of you, and I'm the foreman here. I'm the foreman. My name is Chang, the foreman. I'm paying each of you $1
oh, thank you.
for a day's of work. Great. But guess what, Chinese railroad workers? Pay me for your food. Pay me for your tools. Pay me for your housing. And you pay me for taking your money. I don't do this for free. I gotta get paid. Now you Irish, guess what? Here are your tools.
What?
Here's your food. Here's your housing. And guess what? you don't have to pay me for giving all of you these things. So in the end, you get about $1 and you get about 67 cents.
What?
How does that make you feel? Chinese. How about Irish? Upset that they're not being treated fairly. Now there's some kids in some classes that said, yeah, I'm Irish, I get paid more. And then I flip it immediately and say, okay, you're Chinese now. They go, oh.
I'm Irish.
Oh, that's excellent.
I'm Irish as well.
Okay, great. Good. Irish. Okay, exciting here. But here, one thing you also see in the exhibit at the Capitol is that Deloitte Hansen, the owner of Real Salt Lake, is a great coin collector. And what he has provided for us is a great visual, as I like to say, of how people got paid. These are 1869 coins. This is $31 worth of coins. And that is what the Irish took home per month. This is $26 worth of coins. And that's what the Chinese took home per month. Now you can physically see the difference. It's tangible. It's real. The difference of pay. Why? That is something I never want to tell you. I want you to think about why you think this happened, so that you will learn not to do this for others. Now, is this problem gone? No. Unfortunately, it's not. Here in the state of Utah, at least from our last report, that women get paid for the same job on average 30% less than men. So that's really unbelievable. Okay? And so we need to think about this, that if Thomas Jefferson's words are true, which I believe they are true, that all men are created equal, and when we say men, it's really all men and women, that we need to work towards that every day. Okay? We should never be satisfied. Did you know that next year, in 2020, we're celebrating something pretty remarkable? And remarkable in the sense I can't believe that it's only 100 years that the women had the right to vote in this country. So maybe your teachers' grandmothers, great-grandmothers, or your great-great-grandmother actually did not have the right to vote 100 years ago. And actually Utah is one of the first states, if not the first state, to actually grant women the right to vote, although they had to rescind it when they became a state. And hopefully you'll be learning that in your 4th grade classes next year. Next slide. 5th. Oh, sorry. The 4th grade classes of this school, because, you know, the 4th grade is where you learn Utah history. So we talked about the workers. Now let's talk about the owners. Now they've invested money. They've taken a lot of risk. They deserve to get paid. So let's look at, for example, Stanford. $50 million. Crocker, $300 to $400 million. Is that a lot of money? It's not just a lot of money. That's in $1869. And for every dollar, it's worth about $20. So in fact, Stanford was worth about $1 billion. That's B, billion with a B. Crocker, $6 to $8 billion. And you guys are getting paid $1 a day and 67 cents a day.
What?
So here's also another thing. This is a 1869 nickel. It's worth about $1 today. In the old days, we used to have the nickel store, then the dime store. Now we have the dollar store, right?
Yeah.
And by the time you reach my age, it's probably going to be the $20 bill store. That's called inflation. And I also want to show you something, and I think this is a great picture. Photographs, again, can tell us so much. Yes, they can tell us 1,000 words. They may not tell us the whole story, but this tells us a part of this big picture. Here are these tents. The Chinese lived in the tents, which you paid for, by the way. If you cross the tracks, literally on the other side of the tracks here, these cars here are sleeping cars for the Irish. So that, and back here is where they have a store for the Chinese, where they can buy their foods and supplies. And I think everyone can buy some foods and supplies. And that followed along with the workers. I also like to use art to kind of depict what they did. And the Chinese took on more dangerous jobs. And this, I believe, is at Cape Horn, which is just west of the Sierra Mountains. And they had built this bridge, and it was a little bit too tight. It's a really narrow area, so they had to widen it a little bit. And again, they didn't know what to do. So the Chinese went to the foreman and said, hey, guess what? We actually built the Great Wall of China. Remember that? And they said, we have an idea. And so you look at this picture, what they did is they had these baskets, and I'll be like, they would lower them down in baskets, and they would chisel away and shave off the sides of the mountains. And sometimes they had to drill holes and put black powder or nitroglycerin, light it, and then hope that his buddy up there is going to pull him up in time before, boom. Now, I've done this experiment with every class. Teachers, kind of guess in your mind who's going to say that they want this job. But tell me, who wants to have this job in the baskets? Raise your hands. No? We're predictable. Predictable. Who's going to raise their hands? Yes. Now, are you crazy? That is a dangerous job. You don't get paid extra for that, and you put greater risk in your lives. And here's another interesting thing about this picture. Look at here. All these guys are working. What are these two doing? What's the guy in the suit? Who do you think that guy in the suit might be?
Maybe the rocker?
An Irish boss.
Not an Irish. He's in a suit. Yes?
Probably the foreman.
Maybe an owner of the railroad, is my guess. And this guy, he's wearing with something a little bit different color to distinguish him from the rest of the workers. And he's kind of putting, what do you think he is? I heard it here, but I need to raise hands. Yes?
Foreman.
The foreman. Chang, me. I'm the one who's taking your money. I'm just standing there watching you work. Yeah? So this picture tells us a lot. And just look at this trellis that they had to build by hand. Okay? No tools or anything.
Out in California, they were faced with a gigantic task of driving a railroad east right through the Sierra Nevada mountains. A wall of solid granite 100 miles thick. 16,000 men, mostly young Chinese, labored a summer's boiling sun and in a bitter blast of wintertime, moving ton after ton of earth, timber, and stone. Not with machines, mister, with elbow grease, shovel and pick, man against mountain, muscle against mountain, brains against mountain. And those days would pass that it looks like a mountain might win. In the end, it gave away.
Now, importantly here, Johnny's talking about there's no machinery. There are no backhoes. There are no dump trucks. There are no handheld automatic tools. You have questions? Okay. No handheld tools or anything like that. It's all done by manual labor. Now, I don't know if any of you have been driving up and down I-15 recently up to Ogden, but right now the Union Pacific is replacing a lot of their railroad ties. And before the old days, we even had a friend who was riding with me. When he was a kid, they had to lift each railroad ties out of a vat of just chemicals and then dumping them. Now they have machines that can just pick them up like toothpicks, and lay them down. So let's talk about the Sierra Mountains and specifically tunnel number 6 at Donner Summit. Donner Summit is one of the most beautiful, most picturesque places you'll ever see in the summer. In the winter, one of the most treacherous, dangerous, deadliest spots on this planet. And so it is the toughest section along the transcontinental railroad. Again, solid granite, the hardest rock on the continent. And they had to build 15 of these tunnels. The longest tunnel is tunnel number 6 at Donner Pass. It's about 7,000 feet in elevation, so just a little bit below, let's say, Snowbird or some of our ski resorts. And it's 1,660 feet in length. That's only about a third of a mile. That's really not that far. That's maybe from here, a little bit past 27th East, maybe a little bit towards the golf course. But it's really not that far. Yet it took 2 years to build. 2 years to build. And here is a piece of, it's kind of a riddle, but it's something I want you to think about. They were going so slow, they ended up having to build this tunnel from 4 directions at once. Now tell me, how do you build a tunnel 4 directions at once? Yes.
2 in the middle, 2 on the sides.
What do you mean by 2 in the middle?
Like maybe they could dig straight down, and then once they get to the very exact spot they want to do, they want to this way, and people on the outside went this way.
That is amazing. So you are the last class I'm teaching for this school year. I've taught 1,200 students. You're only the fourth person to get it right. And by the way, I've also taught 250 teachers for professional development. 0 of them got it right. So you, congratulations. So indeed, they had to do it 4 directions at once. And what we had to do is first they started from the west end, going east. And they're chipping away, blasting away, 1 or 2 inches a day at best. So they go to the other side. They're being paid by the mile. They don't have time to do this. And they do it. And they're going and going and going, and not enough. So they went in the middle, just like you said. They drilled a shaft down the middle, and then went inside out. So you've heard about, sometimes you have to have a solution outside the box. Well, this is a solution that you need to do inside the mountain. And here's a diagram that shows you from west to east, east to west, and then from the middle they dug down, and they went from inside out. Now think about this for a second. You excavate this. It has to go somewhere. How do you get it out? You have to get it out by manually carrying out of the mountain, the top and out. And they had the workers in the winter, the Chinese rail workers, stay here the entire winter while the Irish went back to Sacramento to be in California. And this was actually very cool. They would, how sometimes we get an inversion here and we don't see the sun. Can you imagine being in a cave for 2 to 3 weeks at a time?
I don't like this.
So let's go to the next slide. Not only did they have to deal with the geology of the mountain, they also had to deal with, this is a great video that shows us the tunnel and that shaft.
One of the most difficult challenges was Summit Tunnel. At 1,660 feet, it's the longest of 11 tunnels carved by the Chinese through the Sierra on either side of Donner Pass.
So the progress was really slow and painstaking, and because the tunnel took about a year and a half to build.
Yeah, it was less than 2 feet a day for the most part. So you can still see the drill holes that they drilled here for the blasting powder, and these were all drilled by hand. And it was a 2-man team, and you'd have one guy holding the drill bit and turning it as they go, and the other guy hitting it with the hammer. Over here's another really good example of one of the drill holes. You can see this whole cut going down the rock here. When they got to the desired depth, they would fill it with black powder and later nitroglycerin, and then wire them together and get out and then blast the rock face. And then after it had cleared, they'd come back in and muck out all the rock that they had blasted out and then go through the whole process over again. Some of these guys undoubtedly had worked in the gold mines in California and already had experience with this type of excavation technique. So here's the shaft.
Wow, that is incredible. I've always wanted to see this.
Yeah, they started excavating the tunnel at the west end and progress was slow, so they jumped over to the east end and started excavating from that direction and still weren't making fast enough progress. So then they dug this shaft down from the top into the middle of the tunnel and then started working east and west from here. So they were working 4 faces at the same time. And when they finally all met up, they were within 6 inches of where they wanted to be.
That's unbelievable. It really is.
So it would have been really dangerous work as well, in the drilling and then collapses, rocks falling in, blasting accidents, especially the nitroglycerin was super unstable.
Now, 6 inches. 6 inches at 1,660 feet is approximately 20,000 inches, or about 80 times the length of this room. And they're only off by this much without any specialized instruments or tools. And that is what I call a very, very minute margin of error. That's amazing that they could do that. Let's move on to the next one. As I was starting to say, not only did they have to deal with the geology of the Sierra Mountains, they had to deal with Mother Nature. And as I mentioned, in the winter, the Donner Pass is one of the most dangerous, unforgiving places on this planet. And not only that, they had some of the harshest winters in history, on recorded history. They had 44 storms averaging 18 feet a storm. Now remember, when we had that, we all closed school early this year, I think the first week of February, we had, at least at my house, probably 13 inches at most. And we closed school. That's almost 18 times more snow in one storm. And they didn't close the tunnel work. Sometimes the snow drifts because of wind and so forth, the buildup was 60 feet. This is about 9.5, 10 feet. So imagine snow almost 6 times the height of this room. By that time, the railroad bosses were very smart. The Chinese workers were cheaper, they worked more efficiently, and they didn't get sick. So they ended up making up 80 to 90% of the workforce. They endured the cold, avalanches, rock slides, accidents, sicknesses, and frostbite while working 10 to 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Now, I want you to think about it. They came from southern China where there's no snow. They didn't ever see anything like this. We can hold off on questions. Okay? And then not only did that, sometimes the avalanches will sweep people away. And their bodies are not found until springtime. Still frozen, still clutching those tools that you had to pay for. It took 2 years to complete, and the most dangerous job was the fuse runner. What is a fuse runner? So I brought someone a little bit more modern. Well, he's not really more modern than Johnny Cash. He actually was created about the same time. His name is Ethan Hunt. So this is the reboot of Ethan Hunt. You light the matches, you light the fuse. You start running. You trip on the rock. You get up. You're running. You trip again. Your heart's beating. You know you don't have much time. You gotta keep running. You trip one more time. You get up. You don't have much time before you get out of the tunnel until it goes. Boom. Now, if you don't get out of the tunnel, most likely you'll be very severely hurt, if not killed. And you think about it, as the tunnel gets deeper, you've got to run farther. So what I like to do here is show a cross-section. Cross-sections are very important, not just in biology or geology and so forth, but we're actually doing a cross-section of history today, metaphorically we are. But this is a cross-section. Remember the guy says that there's a guy who has to turn the drill bit. Now who wants to have that job? You do, right? Okay, so here, help me turn the drill bit, and I'm gonna hammer, oh, I just smashed your thumb, it's gone. That is a tough job. Can you imagine you actually use a drill bit and someone else is hammering? That's what they did. They would drill down, fill this up with black powder or nitroglycerin, and then boom. And then you have a pile of rocks. Bring in the backhoe, the dump truck. Oh wait, we've already talked about that. They don't have machinery like that. You're just going to carry everything one by one out of the tunnel. And if you're in the middle of the tunnel, guess what? You're putting that maybe in a basket and pulling it up. Right? All by manual, all by elbow grease. How do people get allocated? You gotta raise your hands, remember? How do people get allocated? They probably were lowered up and down the tunnel. Remember, let's pretend that I'm your teacher for the day, for the moment, and treat it like I use teacher, treat your teachers. So let's move on to this next slide. So we brought in a musical. Again, I believe art is so important for us to help understand what it may like to be in the shoes of a Chinese railroad worker for even just a moment. And this particular scene is called Fuse Runner, the song. And one particular, there's a father and son who are coming up the hill. They're new to the camp. And the Irish foreman has already said that one of you, either one of them becomes a fuse runner or one of you will have to become the fuse runner. So this is what I want you to think about while we're talking about, while we're watching this particular clip. A, why is the camp trying to convince one of them to become the fuse runner? And despite hearing everything, why does that person decide to become the fuse runner? In the meantime, why don't they just use more fuse instead of a fuse runner? And how do they treat this particular worker? So let's go ahead and enjoy, for the next few minutes, Fuse Runner from Gold Mountain.
Brother, are you fast? I don't understand.
Can you run?
Run like the wind, no like lightning.
He can chase down any runaway water buffalo on our farm.
I can run, but my father...
Don't worry about me.
Your father will have plenty of work to do. But you, can you run?
Yes, fast. Why?
There is a job. Not enough. It is dangerous.
Last one died.
You get paid extra. There's lots of rest time. Yeah, you can rest in peace. It's a good job, but dangerous.
What is this job?
We need a man to be the fuse runner. Fuse runner? The tunnel, we must blast you like the fuse. Then you run fast to safety as the explosives blow. Don't be too slow.
Where the hell you go? You're the fuse runner.
Then you rest as we clear the rock. If you don't do our best, our pay they'll dock. But you paid if you run or rest.
Cause they know that you'll always do your best. Or in peace you'll rest as the fuse runner. Run for your money, for your life, for your future sons and wife. You'll begin your journey home. Run and you'll end the ceaseless strife of the railroad worker's life. You can run your way back home. Back home.
How long is this fuse? About 10 feet. You have a few seconds to get clear and then...
Boom!
Why can't you just use more fuse? Well, fuse is expensive and in short supply.
And we are cheap and plentiful. The fuse goes out when the north wind blows. So you run to a light and back on it goes. Then you turn away while you curse the day. You take extra pay as you run away. You're the fuse runner. Run for your money, for the chance to escape this circumstance that still keeps us from our home. Run without a backward glance. Run and pray that heaven grants you a way to run back home. Back home.
You get to rest between runs. No other work is required. It's a good job, if you're fast.
Watch your feet when you light the fuse. Be careful of the steps you choose. If you fall and slip, or you lose your grip, here's a tip: don't trip, or it's your last trip as a fuse runner.
Who among you has done this?
No one. There is no one here to speak of it. They all died.
All.
All. Not one has survived past the 4th week. Unlucky number 4, the number of death. How much extra?
Double.
I'll do it!
No, lit.
He say he do!
So?
He say he do.
He do it. Good. Chew, tell him he starts now.
Brother, the boss demon would like you to begin immediately. We've just started to blast this tunnel over there. There's a fuse ready to be lit just about 15 feet from the entrance.
No, lit. I absolutely forbid it. You cannot do this.
It pays double. We'll get home sooner.
Honored uncle, everything will be fine.
Here, take this.
What's this for?
It's an extra piece of fuse. Fuse runners always carry a short length with them. It's for good luck.
Thank you.
And here are your matches. Good luck, Guanlet Ming.
sons and wife you've begun. Your journey home. And you'll end the ceaseless life of the railroad worker's life. You will run your way back home. Back home, back home, back home.
Okay, so the first question I have for you is, why is the rest of the camp trying to convince either the father or the son to become the fuse runner? Yes.
Maybe because they don't want to get hurt or they don't want to get killed.
They don't want to get hurt, they don't want to get killed. That's an excellent answer. So they've explained to them the rest of them had died. Then why did Lit, the young person, take the job? Yes.
Well, maybe he thought he was faster.
Thought he was fast. Yes.
He wanted to get paid.
You want to get paid? Yeah.
The job paid double the money.
Job paid double money. You know, one of the best answers I heard in the last few days is because he needed to take the job, or he thought he needed to take the job, because he did get paid double. Why was it so important for him to get double? What did he want to do? Yeah.
He wanted to live his life, he wants to find the easier ways to live life through, with money, because he gets paid double and double is better.
Because where does he want to go? Where do they want to go with the money once they get enough money? Yes? Back home. So let's listen to these lyrics very carefully. Run for your money, for your life, for your future son or wife and wife. So you're talking about doing it for their family. They want to go back home. They want to escape the circumstance of a railroad worker's life, of working so hard against this mountain, right? It's not a fun and easy job. So Lit takes what we call a gamble. He doubles down, saying, well, if I get paid double, we can go home twice as fast, right? That's the idea behind this. Now, how did, let's say, for example, once he agreed to it, and Hagen, the Irishman, comes over and checks him out, how do you think he treats Lit? What does he look like? Almost like he's treating him. Do you remember he goes like, he checks his knees? Almost like someone would check livestock or a horse race or a racehorse. Now, here's a question. I think Lit asked a really great question. Why don't you just use more fuse? What was the answer? Yeah.
That it costs too much money.
And it's in short supply. And you know what? Wong's our resident student in the Civic. He's the guy in red with the big puffy beard. What does he say in response once he says that fuse is short supply and expensive? What does Wong say?
Just run for your life.
A little bit different. He says, and we are cheap and plentiful. So what do you think, or who do you think the railroad owners valued more? Fuse or the Chinese railroad worker? Fuse. Now this sounds terrible, but it's not the only time in history we've done this. When we see we as mankind or humankind or people. Like I took my family and my daughters to the Empire State Building this last summer. I was reading the tour. The guy says, you know, back in the days, they could build as fast as they could, as long as there were 3 deaths or less per week. I'm like, wow. So what was more important? Building fast or human life? The same with the Pinto, the Ford Pinto in the 70s. We knew that if you crashed into the back of the Pinto, it would explode. And Ford, instead of recalling everything, said they calculated that it would be cheaper to just pay out those who got killed, their family got killed, than to recall everything. But fortunately, we've made changes where value of life is better. So in the end, now if we're building, how many deaths per week are we allowed so we can build as fast as we can? Yes.
Very small.
Very small amount. That's not even quite right. Yeah.
0.
0 fatalities. Now I know that's mostly used with a highway safety thing, but 0 fatalities. I'm in real estate development. I do not want any accidents, especially any deaths on any of my projects. We follow safety. It costs us more money. But guess what? That's the right thing to do. And that's what we learn over time. And that's why you should learn what we have done in the past so you know we don't make these mistakes again in the future. Next slide. So here we are. They finally finished this treacherous mountains of the Sierras, and they're now in the deserts of Nevada and Utah, which is all flat. And as Johnny says, nothing can stop them now. Next slide. Sorry about that.
Rolling, rolling, on the promontory Utah we are rolling. It was a big job, and it needed men that could think a mile high and 3,000 miles long. And it needed muscle. It took Irishmen laying ties and spiking rail and singing and cussing every mile. It took Chinese imported by the shipload, and they challenged the high Sierras. They came on, tunneling the mountains, bridging the gorges, hammering their way across the prairies. One day they set a record. They laid over 10 miles of track between sunup and sundown. Nothing could stop.
The 10-mile day is one of the most remarkable feats along the transcontinental railroad, where they laid 10 miles of track in one day. Now remember, the Central Pacific was only doing a third of a mile per day on average because of the mountains. Now why on earth, on April 28th, 1869, just 10 days before the scheduled ceremony, would they want to lay 10 miles of track in one day? They have plenty of time to finish that. Why would they want to do that? Let's give me some guesses. Yes, in the back.
They wanted to win the race?
They wanted to win the race. They already knew where the stop point was, so they didn't really, it wasn't going to matter who was going to get there first. Yes?
Well, they wanted to make it easier for the other side by making it to where the stopping point was less farther.
The stopping point was already determined to be a promontory summit. And why would they want to make that easier for the other team? They were in competition with each other. Yeah. All right. Yeah, one more guess.
Because they work harder because it's not mountains.
Not quite. I'll give you an answer here. Well, first of all, does anyone know the story of John Henry? What happened with John Henry?
He like hammered down the face but he died when he was in the middle, like on the mountain.
Right. They almost worked him to death, right? Yeah. They did work him to death. John Henry, the legend of John Henry. But here's my answer. This is one of the few times I'm actually going to give you an answer straight out. 3 letters. E-G-O. Ego. They built 10 miles a day because of ego. So what happened was the Union Pacific one day built 5 miles of track in one day. Pretty remarkable. And there's a song that says, whatever you can do, I can do better. So the Central Pacific decides to build 6 miles. Well, Dr. Grant's not going to have any of that. So the Union Pacific builds 8 miles. And then he bets Charles Crocker, I bet you in the Central Pacific cannot build 10 miles of track in one day. And I'll bet you $10,000 on it. Now remember, $10,000 is about $200,000 in today's money. Charles Crocker is brilliant. A brilliant businessman, brilliant engineer, and very shrewd, very calculating. So he and James Strobridge came up with a plan for 8 Irish workers and a small army of 4,000, an estimated 4,000 Chinese rail workers, to build 10 miles of track in one day. Now as we go forward to this next slide here, what you'll see is that they did this again with very simple tools. You need railroad ties along the grade, and let's talk about the grade here for a second. There was something that happened at that time called, there was an event in Salt Lake Valley called the Locust Event, where it destroyed all the crops. Wow, sounds familiar. Something happened in Ireland, something happened in China, destroyed all the crops. And so the Mormons, Brigham Young brought what we call the Mormon graders. And they actually eventually graded about 20% of the transcontinental railroad line to grade the bed of the rails, okay? Because you had to keep it pretty flat. You had to keep it with a 1% grade at all times. That means it can't adjust more in height than 1 inch for every 100 feet. Okay, so they'd lay down the railroad ties, and then they had to lay down the rails, connect the rails by fish plates with bolts, and then hammer down, secure the rails with spikes. And with each spike, to be efficient, you can only do at most 3 strikes for every spike. Now, I don't know if that has something to do with baseball. Later baseball, I think, was invented after the railroad. But 3 spikes for every strike. Then we have shovels, mauls, tamping bars, crowbars, and that's it. And then we do have a cart that was pulled by horses. So if we look here at the next slide, you'll see in the morning of April 28th, at sunup, that small army went out. Horses pulling the rails with the supplies. The Chinese are working there, setting everything down. If we look at the next slide, we see the 8 Irishmen carrying each of these 30-foot rails, weighing 560 pounds, onto the railroad ties. Next. Followed by the Chinese. What they do is they dump all the spikes on the ground. And then the fish plates. They go and get the fish plates. One team will bolt the fish plates. The other team will take the spikes. 1, 2, 3. They would drive them in. And you can see here the telegraph is being built along the same line. Here's another piece of line. We're not using the telegraph anymore, but we're using what we call land easements, or the right to put a line there for our internet and telecommunication lines today. So the railroad really built what I call the infrastructure, or the skeleton of our country. Next. The other workers, if you've ever been out, who was at Promontory on Friday? Some of you were, yes, no? Or over the weekend? But whenever you go out to the desert, even on a beautiful day, the desert is also relentless. No cover, wind, and you're out there, even though we have ice streaks and we have air-conditioned cars, we have water, you'll get beat down, you'll get tired. So these guys had to go around, make sure everyone stayed hydrated with, of course, boiled water. So by lunchtime at 1:30, they reached to a point that they knew 6.5 miles. They knew they were going to make it. So they called that spot Camp Victory. Today, Camp Victory is now known as Roselle, which is directly north of Robert Smith's, an American sculptor's most important piece, the Spiral Jetty. So it's kind of neat. We have all these cool things here in northern Utah. Has everyone been to the Spiral Jetty? Some of you. It's remarkable because of the changing of colors of the salination of the lake. It's pretty neat. So let's go here and see what Camp Victory looked like in 1869. Hey, look at this. Do you remember these? The tents. Who lived in those? And here, the cars. Who lived in those? Yeah, you guys are catching on. So here they're serving lunch, and there's a woman I want to bring up here that we haven't talked about. Her name is Mrs. Hannah Strawbridge, James Strawbridge's wife. She's the only woman to see the construction of the railroad all the way from Sacramento to Promontory Summit. She was truly an angel. She took care of the workers. She cooked for the workers. She took care of them when they were sick. She herself even contracted smallpox. And this is, again, what I'm trying to tell you, another perspective of the story we don't hear about all the time. And this is where I think by learning more of a history, you become better thinkers as well. And although this is taken in 10 Mile Canyon, it's actually not part of the 10 Mile Day. But this is an example to show you what we had to do, what they had to do towards the last 3.5 miles. They went a little bit slower. They were a little tired, but they also had more curves. And you don't just go and say, hey, I need a curved rail with an arc of 42 degrees or something like that. They actually had to go and they actually hammer out the arc. Now, you just don't do just one with this particular arc or whatever turn you want. You actually have to do 2 the exact same way because you have to keep them parallel. Because if they're not parallel, what happens to the train?
Jumps the track.
It jumps the track so it gets derailed. So how difficult do you think that must be to do by hand, by hammer? At the end of the day, they finished their 10 miles. And we look at the next pictures here. We can see this is a replica of the 10 Mile Day marker that honor this great achievement. This record, just like John Stockton's assist record, will never be broken. But really, it shouldn't be broken because they should never put people in this type of working condition again. This is like putting 4,000 Chinese and 8 Irishmen in John Henry's shoes for 12 grueling hours. If you look at the next slide here, I love stats. I think stats are great. And these stats here, so these statistics here, are remarkable. First of all, they built 10 miles and 56 feet of track in one day. That's actually going from here even past the airport, Salt Lake Airport, in one day. 25,800 railroad ties. Like I said, if you're driving up and down I-50, you see these piles of railroad ties. There might be 150 railroad ties there. So you just imagine that we're talking almost 200 times each of those piles for the number of railroad ties they use for one day, and they all were carried by hand. 55,000 spikes times 3 strikes per spike is 165,000 strikes at a minimum that they swung, the Chinese railroad workers swung. 14,080 bolts that they had to tighten. 3,520 30-foot rails, again weighing 560 pounds, carried by the 8 Irish workers. That's nearly 2 million pounds. The total weight of all materials was 4.462 million pounds. And each of those Irish railroad workers carried, on average, 250,000. That's 250,000 pounds of iron in one day. Now imagine, you have a 5-pound dumbbell, 5-pound dumbbell. You pick up that 5-pound dumbbell, you carry it a certain distance, you set it down. Easy?
Yeah.
Do it 50,000 times in one day. 50,000 times in one day. And that, I hope you get a sense and feeling of how incredible, astounding, mind-blowing that this accomplishment was. So let's move on to our slide here. We know the names of our 8 Irish railroad workers. Thankfully, we know their names. We know the foreman, these great 8 men. And they got paid a whopping $4 bonus, 4 times a one day's pay, while Charles Crocker was being paid $10,000. So $32 in total out of that $10,000 were paid to the Irish. All those thousands of Chinese railroad workers, still known as John Chinaman. And yes, I'm sorry, that's not a donut. That's just a big fat zero in their bonus. So $32 out of for 4,088 workers, 4,008 workers approximately. While Charles Crocker, whether he got paid or not, because there's some dispute whether he actually got, that Thomas Durant actually paid the bet. Knowing Thomas Durant, he probably reneged. But nonetheless, that is remarkable. It's something for you to think about. For me, as I run a business, if someone does a good job, we give them a bonus. We give them incentives to do a good job. So here, unfortunately, you can't see it very well. This is the sign, but this is the original sign. It's actually in terrible shape right now, unfortunately. It's been abused by both weather and man. There's a shotgun, the relentless western sun, holes and so forth. But this now brings us to your homework assignment. You don't need to write anything down. I just want you to incorporate this into your DNA. The 1869 Transcontinental Railroad was the greatest engineering feat of the 19th century. It was the moonshot before the moonshot. And I chose this picture on purpose rather than using the champagne shot. This is Thomas Hill's painting. It was done and redone, but it includes Chinese railroad workers here, Irish workers here laying it, Leland Stanford, Thomas Durant, others, the people of the telegraph pole. And this is facing, based on this telegraph pole, we know they're facing east. These are the Wasatch Mountains here, Corinne's over here. It's a beautiful painting. We've got the tents. We've got the flag of the U.S. at the time. It tells a lot of this particular story. But this is 100 years in a couple months prior to something we did incredible in 1969.
It's one small step for man, one
giant leap for mankind.
In 1969,
Neil Armstrong.
the United States of America landed on the moon, and Neil Armstrong uttered those famous words: "A small step for mankind, but a giant leap. A small step for man, but a giant leap for mankind." It was a day where nobody cared which political party we belonged to, what race, gender, if you're wealthy or you're poor. We were all Americans. Because everyone, as one, just like our theme for Spike 150, as one, completed this enormous task. So that brings me to our final slide and your homework assignment. What's next? What are you going to do
Take pictures.
to make something by 2069 that will unite this country and do all these great things? Because my belief is that the greatness of America is never behind us. It is always ahead of us. And you are the ones who are going to lead us to that greatness. I really thank you for your time to learn about the Transcontinental Railroad and the Chinese railroad workers. And have a great day.